I know that all of us at some point in our lives wish we had a do-over or an opportunity to attempt something again. And there have been several times in my own life when I said something and almost immediately wished I had it back. And there's times in which I've done things that have hurt people, and upon reflection, immediately wish I had been able to take that action back. And all of us can understand the sentiment that comes when we reflect upon what we have said or had done. We regret having hurt whoever it was. And in a beautiful way, that sentiment really reflects the gospel message today. Because today's gospel is all about taking the old and making it new. And we see this in so many ways, with the new creation, with the cleansing waters, and with the light from darkness. And I can't emphasize enough how wonderful this gospel is to reflect upon during Lent. And it is not by chance that it falls on the fourth Sunday of Lent, which is Laudate Sunday, when we're called to praise, to give the Lord our praise. And in today's gospel, we have three main players. We have Jesus, the man born blind, and those who John refers to in his gospel as the Jews. But that term, the Jews, that John refers to really speaks about the Pharisees and the other religious leaders in the community. And I want to really focus on the encounters between Jesus and the blind man and Jesus and the Pharisees. And in that first encounter between Jesus and the blind man, there's two very important interactions. The first is how he heals the man. He doesn't just speak words and the man magically sees. He spits in dirt and makes clay with his saliva, which he then puts on the man's eyes. And I don't know about y'all, but if I heard somebody saying, you know what, I'm going to heal you, they start spitting in the dirt, making clay out of it, and offer to put it on my eyes, I'd be like, you know what, Jesus, I think I'm okay today. I can go without that. But there's actually a very, very intentional image that Jesus is drawing us to by this action. Because in Jewish and early Christian tradition, there is the belief that upon the creation of Adam, that God spat into the dirt, made clay, and from that he fashioned Adam. And so by Jesus spitting into the dirt, making clay, and putting it on this man's eyes, he is immediately drawing everyone's attention that there is a new creation that is happening through me being here. And the second image in this interaction between Jesus and the blind man is what he tells him to do next, in which he sends him to wash in the pools of Siloam. And of course, it is after this that the man is able to see. And we as Catholics, if we hear the term healing and its connection with something in which water is washing, our mind should immediately go to something we received, most of us received as infants, the sacrament of baptism. Because that is the sacrament that cleanses us from original sin and restores us to the light of grace. New creation and the washing, all in that sacrament of baptism. And in order to understand the effects of this new creation, we need to then look at the interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees at the end of today's gospel. And this interaction really highlights the final theme of darkness and light. And at the conclusion of today's gospel, we see another curious passage in which some of the Pharisees asked Jesus, "Are we also blind?" And he responds, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now you say, we see, your guilt remains." Now, reading this out of context would really make no sense. But when we see it in terms of the gospel as a whole, and within the theme of light and darkness, it really helps us to understand Jesus' response. Because in the healing of the blind man, there is a greater transformation going on in that man's life than simply being able to see. And yes, while he does go from being physically blind to being able to physically see, his greater healing is his spiritual sight. Because at the beginning of today's gospel, the blind man doesn't know who Jesus is. Upon having his sight given to him, and when he is questioned by the Pharisees, he says this man is a prophet. He is sent from God. And then even more so in the second encounter with Christ, he calls him Kyrios, or Lord. The word that literally is the one that would be applied for God. So he is recognizing the Christ as my Lord. And so while his eyes can now see, because they, yes, have made a literal journey from darkness to light, the greater journey is the man's journey of faith. Whereas when we contrast this with the Pharisees, you understand Jesus' response to them. Because while they can physically see, they are spiritually blind. Because their hardness of heart is preventing them from recognizing Jesus as the Christ. Because my brothers and sisters, the sacrament of baptism is a literal do-over, in which Christ is giving to the world a second chance to follow God, to follow Him. In that sacrament, we are literally recreated so that once again we too can become His disciples. And this is done through the cleansing waters of baptism that wipe away original sin and restore us to a life of grace. And yes, every sacrament has an outward sign of healing. And in today's gospel, we have that image of the healing of the man's vision. But also, the deeper meaning of each sacrament is invisible. And we see this today through the healing of that man's heart and his reception of faith. And through that faith, recognizes Christ as Kyrios, or Lord. And thus the calling for you and I today is to not be like the Pharisees, whose hardness of heart caused them to be spiritually blind to who Christ is, but to allow grace, the grace of our baptism, to be made real, to be open, to be realized in our own lives, so that we can recognize Christ as Lord. And thus on this day, Laudate Sunday, which literally means praise, we can give that praise to our God, to our Lord, and thank Him for giving humanity the opportunity for a do-over. And so you and I, because of that, because of our baptism, because of the gift of Christ, can once again be brought to the beautiful life of grace and to recognize Christ as Lord.